The warning sirens didn't scream. They hissed like something alive and scared. It was nearly midnight at EtherCloud's Tier 4 data facility, and the hot aisle glowed like a machine's fever dream. Rows of GPU racks pulsed with LED veins, green, amber, red. Behind a sheet of reinforced glass, the isolation bay sealed with a soft but sinister click. The internal lock had engaged. Inside, CEO Ilara Miles stood alone, backlit by the trembling light of machine panic. Her breath caught in her throat as the door's status shifted to thermal lockdown mode. No override, no help. Only the rising hum of desperation, the fans inside the rack spinning faster, sharper, like they too were trying to scream. She tapped her comm. No response. From the other side of the glass, a security guard was already yelling, "Stay back. You janitor, do not touch that." The man he was shouting at wasn't in uniform. At least not the kind that gets attention. Blue coveralls, utility belt, rubber soles. A name stitched in white thread over his chest, Gavin. He didn't flinch. Instead, Gavin Hale dropped to one knee beside the floor grate, fingers working fast across the edge of the raised tile. It took him less than a second to find the magnetic bypass latch. Another second to pop the panel free. A burst of pressurized heat rolled out from below like the breath of a dragon trapped too long. "You touch that system, and you're liable," the guard barked, stepping forward. Gavin didn't look up. "The machine's panicking," he said calmly. "You can tell by the fans. Hear it." "They shifted pitch. Means your airflow's failing." The guard froze. Ilara heard it too now, the subtle change in tone, the pitch climbing like a violin string drawn too tight. Gavin reached into the crawlspace and adjusted a manual airflow bypass. Then with a flick of the wrist, he disengaged the mechanical lock on the fire-retardant auto chute inside the wall. A soft thunk. The chamber's lock disengaged. The door slid open. Ilara stumbled out into the hallway, heels clicking against polished concrete, the cool air biting her cheeks. For a moment, she just stood there, caught between fury and disbelief. The guard exhaled sharply. He just broke protocol. "I stabilized your airflow," Gavin replied evenly, still crouched by the open floor tile. "If you listen long enough, the system tells you what it needs." Behind him, the server fans were already slowing, returning to their baseline hum, like a heart finally calming. Ilara adjusted her blazer. The edge of it was damp with condensation. "That area is restricted to senior engineering and security personnel." "I know. Then why were you—" "I was cleaning the observation corridor when the red line hit." He stood now, slow and deliberate. Taller than she expected. Didn't have time to fetch a badge reader. Her eyes narrowed. "Who taught you to read airflow like that?" He met her gaze, quiet. "The system did. Eventually." From down the corridor, Andrew Park, the company's COO, appeared sleep-deprived and irritated. "What happened?" Andrew's eyes swept the scene, then landed on Gavin. "Who authorized janitorial personnel to interfere with server response?" Ilara didn't answer right away. She was still staring at Gavin. Something about the look in his eyes. Not arrogance, not apology either, just presence. Grounded like someone who'd done this before. Andrew pressed again. Was this unauthorized access? Gavin's voice was steady. The machine locked onto a false overheat signal. Hot aisle choke. She was inside. And you, what played hero, I listened. That's all. Andrew scoffed. This isn't a playground. That's $1 billion of equipment you just reached into. Gavin didn't respond. But Ilara, she almost said thank you. Almost. Instead, she buttoned her blazer and turned toward the elevator. "File a report," she said to the guard. "I'll review it." As she passed Gavin, their shoulders nearly brushed. She didn't look at him, but he did glance at her hand, the one still trembling slightly from the adrenaline. Just for a second. A flash of something crossed his face. Recognition memory. She was gone before he could name it. Left alone, Gavin knelt again to replace the floor tile, the room quieting around him. The cooling fans exhaled a final sigh of relief. but something inside him hadn't cooled. Not yet. The next morning, that hum still rang faintly in the back of Gavin's skull. Not the machines, but the alarm, the high-pitched wail embedded in muscle memory, not from last night, from years ago, from the night a warning system failed, and no one listened. He shook it off. The supply room door creaked open behind him. One of the younger janitors leaned in. "Hey, man, heard you saved the boss lady last night. They gonna give you a raise or a lawsuit?" Gavin didn't smile. Hopefully neither. He wiped his hands, folded the rag, and looked at the utility cart. One item had shifted during last night's scramble, a folded piece of paper taped neatly to the handle. A drawing. A hand-drawn sketch of a paper drone with wings too large for its body. Mila's doing. His daughter always left him tiny things. "Little you got this messages." This one had a scribble in crayon at the bottom. "If it falls, I'll blow it back up, Dad." He tucked it into his pocket. Behind him, the server floor glowed again, cool and ordered, like nothing had ever gone wrong. But something had shifted. Two worlds had touched, if only briefly. Power and humility, steel and breath. A CEO who almost drowned in machine panic, and a janitor who pulled her out by listening to what the machine didn't say, and neither of them would be the same again. Machines panic, too, but people know how to breathe before they decide. The morning light at Ether Cloud always looked sterile, white, flat, like it refused to remember the night before. In the executive conference room, the hum of the HVAC mixed with the quiet fury of people trying not to argue. The crisis from the previous night had already found its way into every inbox labeled urgent. The incident report flashed on the wall, unauthorized entry server isolation breach. Alara Miles sat at the head of the table, hair pulled back, coffee untouched. Her posture was perfect. Her pulse wasn't. Across from her PR lead, Willa Chen, impeccably dressed and perpetually 2 steps ahead of any narrative, was already in motion. "The press doesn't know yet," Willa said, tapping her tablet. "But if this leaks, the headline writes itself. Janitor endangers CEO during system failure." Her tone was calm, but her eyes burned. "We need to control the frame before someone else defines it." Next to her, Andrew Park, the COO, cleared his throat. Older, sharp-eyed, with the calm of someone who'd survived more boardrooms than earthquakes. "Alara. I'm not against human stories," he began, "but downtime costs lives. Maybe not in headlines, but in hospitals, banks, airports. You know this." He leaned forward, voice dropping an octave. "I don't oppose kindness. I oppose downtime." The words hung there like a verdict. Alara didn't respond. She studied the report again, the thermal lock, the bypass, the manual override. Gavin Hale's name sat neatly in the middle of it. Custodial staff, night maintenance, PR lead. Willa kept going. "If we don't issue a disciplinary action, it looks like we're endorsing reckless heroism. One wrong word, in the wrong hour, one tweet, and we're trending for all the wrong reasons." Andrew nodded. "Procedures exist for a reason. We can't have staff freelancing in critical zones." Ilara's pen hovered above the disciplinary form. Her name was printed on the signature line. She could almost hear the night again, the hiss of overworked fans, the change in air pressure, the calm in Gavin's voice when everyone else had panicked. Her hand trembled once. She lowered the pen. "We'll review the safety protocols first," she said quietly. Andrew frowned. "That's unnecessary." "It's essential," she cut in. "If a janitor can open a lock faster than our engineers, maybe the problem isn't him." Silence. Willa exhaled through her nose. "You're aware that's not the headline investors want." "Then we'll give them a better one," Alara replied, standing. "We listen." She left the room before anyone could speak. Downstairs, the service corridor smelled faintly of cleaning solvent and machine oil. The rhythmic swish of a mop echoed like a metronome against the tiled floor. Gavin was working the far-end sleeves, rolled up a towel slung over one shoulder. At his side was Eli, the new intern, barely 19, nervous, eager to prove himself. He watched Gavin scrub the line where the wall met the floor with surprising precision. "Why bother with corners?" Eli asked. "No one even sees them." Gavin smiled faintly. "That's why they matter." The kid frowned, not getting it. Gavin rinsed the mop, then nodded toward the small inspection gauge on the janitor's cart, a pressure indicator most people ignored. "Machines have hearts," he said. "You check those first. Then the screws." Eli blinked. "What?" "Check the heart first, then the screws. If you only fix what's visible, you'll miss what's hurting." The kid grinned awkwardly. "You sound like a therapist, just a janitor who listens." A voice drifted down the hallway. "You'll make a terrible PR quote if anyone hears that." Elara stood by the doorway holding a clipboard she clearly didn't need. She looked different in daylight, less myth, more human. For a split second, she watched the way Gavin moved deliberate calm, the rhythm of someone who found order in the simplest tasks. He noticed her and straightened. "Morning, ma'am." "Morning," she said. Her tone was professional, but her eyes lingered on the cart, the tools, the faint crease in his uniform sleeve. "You always clean like this every day. The small things keep the big things from breaking." She almost smiled. Almost. "Good philosophy." "Not mine," he said, looking back at the floor. "Just something my wife used to say." That last word, wife, landed like a soft stone dropped in water. Elara hesitated, sensing a story, but not daring to ask. Instead, she nodded and walked on. Later in the break room, Gavin sat alone with his lunchbox, opened 2 sandwiches, an apple, and a folded napkin. The handwriting on it was crooked done in bright purple marker. "You got this, Dad." His phone buzzed. A picture message. It was Mila, his 9-year-old daughter, grinning with a paper drone in her hands. She'd drawn tiny faces on the wings. Her text read, "If it falls, I'll blow it back up. Promise." He chuckled, the sound barely audible, then saved the photo to a folder labeled Mila's Sky. The break room door opened. One of the senior techs stepped in, giving him a look that wasn't exactly friendly. "Hey, you're the guy from last night, right? The one who saved the CEO." Gavin didn't look up. "I fixed airflow." "Right." The man smirked. "Just saying most people don't get second chances around here. Try not to make the rest of us look bad." The door slammed behind him. Gavin exhaled slowly, the air leaving him like a tire losing pressure. He wasn't angry, just tired. That evening, after his shift, he waited outside the small public school near the river. The autumn air smelled like wet leaves and chalk dust. Kids poured out in waves, laughing, backpacks swinging. Mila ran to him, arms wide. "Dad." He knelt, catching her midair hug. She smelled of paint and bubble gum. "You remembered the drone," she said proudly, holding it up. He smiled. "I always do. This one's stronger. I fixed the wings with tape this time." He turned it over, studying the patchwork of tape and marker. "Looks like it's been through a lot." "It has." She grinned. "But it still flies." They walked home through the soft hum of streetlights, her small hand in his, the city glowing like circuitry above them. For a moment, it was peaceful. But even peace had edges. When they reached their apartment, the mailbox overflowed with bills. One envelope bore the seal of his former employer, a name he couldn't say without feeling the weight of 1,000 silences. He opened it mechanically. A routine notice. Non-disclosure renewal reminder. He stared at the line. Failure to maintain confidentiality may result in permanent industry blacklisting. His jaw tightened. He had once been an industrial systems technician, the kind of man companies trusted with safety codes with lives. Then came the accident. His wife, a supervisor, had written a memo about a faulty design. They'd buried it, along with her. He'd signed the NDA to secure the settlement, to protect Mila's future. But it had cost him his own. Now he scrubbed lines on floors other people walked on. And somehow it still felt like rebuilding something real. The next morning, Elara found herself in the observation bay again. The glass walls looked out over the endless racks of humming servers. From somewhere below, she heard faint laughter. Gavin teaching the intern again. You start with the heart, not the screws. Ilara froze. That simple line carried more weight than she wanted to admit, because up here in her world of contracts and code she hadn't checked the heart in a very long time. She touched the railing, letting her fingers rest on the cool steel, the vibration of the machines running steady underneath. Maybe he was right. That night, before leaving, she saw it again, a small paper drone caught in the air vent wings fluttering in the recycled breeze. Someone had written on it in purple crayon, "If it falls, I'll blow it back up." She smiled for the first time in days. Sometimes the first thing you fix isn't the machine, it's the way you see it. The cold aisle always hummed like it had a secret. It was early evening, and the observation bay on the second floor of EtherCloud's data center sat in its usual hush. Glass walls framed the massive labyrinth of servers below, lit in soft blues and whites. The air was chilled, controlled like the heart of a machine that didn't trust itself to feel. Ilara stood by the railing, arms folded, watching the endless rows of machines pulse in silence. The hiss of chilled air crawled across the floor vents. And then, a flicker. Something light foreign drifting through the artificial wind like a message from another world. She turned her head. A paper drone made from a flyer torn off a company bulletin glided lazily on the airflow wings, slightly uneven nose dipped like it had known both flight and fall. Below, near the cold aisle intake, a small girl crouched carefully beside a utility cart. Cheeks puffed as she exhaled toward the drone. Who brings a child here? Ilara thought her CEO instincts kicking in, but she didn't move. Instead, she watched. The girl giggled softly, tracking the little craft's hover as it caught another draft and floated upward again. A man stepped into view, catching it midair with practiced hands. Gavin. He ruffled his daughter's hair, then bent to fold the wing slightly, correcting its drift. They didn't see Ilara yet. She remained still, separated by glass and silence. She wasn't sure what made her speak. Do robots dream when they sleep? Her voice came out quieter than intended, but Gavin heard it. So did the girl. They both looked up. Gavin blinked in surprise. Mila just stared, her head tilted in curiosity. Ilara gave a small shrug, almost self-mocking. Sorry. Strange question. Gavin stood straighter, brushing his hands on his work pants. Not strange, he said. Just rare. He gently nudged Mila forward. Say hello. Mila gave a shy wave. Hi, I'm Mila. This is Dusty. She held up the paper drone like it was a pet. Ilara allowed a faint smile. Dusty, 'cause it keeps falling on the floor, Mila said proudly. But I made it fly again. Gavin gently steered her back. Sorry she's this close to the aisle. We were just testing wind paths. Won't happen again. Ilara surprised herself. It's okay. The air feels warm here. Gavin tilted his head. This is the cold aisle. I know, she replied. That's what I meant. There was an awkward beat, one of those rare silences not filled with judgment, but something else. Something curious. Mila tugged on Gavin's sleeve. Can I go fold another one? He nodded. Use the recycling tray. No HR reports today deal. She giggled and trotted toward the break room. Ilara stepped closer to the railing, watching the machines below. Rows upon rows. All glowing, working, calculating. Do you ever wonder if they get tired? She asked. Gavin followed her gaze. Not yet. She chuckled softly. Not yet. When they do, we'll owe them a better apology than the one we gave each other. Ilara didn't respond immediately. Her eyes scanned the NOC dashboard on the wall, a real-time panel of server health node traffic airflow metrics. Among the blinking data streams, a single line flashed. Debug human input required. The text flickered, then faded. She stared at it a beat longer than necessary. What's that? She asked. Gavin glanced up. A placeholder in the system. It means the code hit something it can't predict. A pause, waiting for someone to tell it what matters. She turned toward him slowly. And if no one does, it just keeps waiting. The thought made her oddly uneasy. She looked back toward the racks. Cold logic. Beautifully cruel in its precision. I used to like how predictable machines were, she admitted. But lately, I wonder if we've built too many things that don't know how to ask for help. Gavin gave a small nod. Or maybe we just stopped listening. She turned sharply surprised. He didn't elaborate, just stood there quietly the way only someone comfortable with silence could. And maybe that's what hit her the hardest. He didn't push, he didn't probe, he didn't try to prove anything. He listened with no need to fix her, and for the first time in what felt like years, she didn't feel judged, or measured, or filtered through someone's expectation. She felt seen, not as the CEO, not as the decision-maker, just as a person. It left a crack in the armor she'd worn too long. Mila returned holding a new drone folded from a colorful cafeteria menu. She waved it proudly. This one's called Sky Burger Alara, almost laughed. Creative branding. Marketing is her strong suit, Gavin said dryly. Mila grinned, then turned toward her father. Ready, go ahead. She blew gently, sending Skyburger gliding through the breeze again. It dipped, caught the air, and soared a little farther this time before spiraling down near Ilara's feet. She bent, picked it up, and turned it over. On the underside, in bright marker, it read, "You got this," followed by a tiny drawing of a smiling cloud. Ilara looked up. Gavin's eyes met hers. She didn't say, "Thank you," not directly, but she placed the drone carefully on the observation ledge like it was something fragile and sacred. Then she nodded, turned, and walked away. But just before she disappeared through the hallway, she glanced back over her shoulder. Gavin hadn't moved. Mila was already folding another miracle. And for the first time in a long time, Ilara didn't feel cold in the cold aisle. If machines need human input, maybe leaders do too. The data center at night was a different animal. Gone were the waves of engineers, the click of heels on polished concrete, the buzz of back-to-back meetings. What remained was a low, mechanical breath, a constant inhale and exhale of machines doing exactly what they were told. No more, no less. Ilara Miles didn't usually linger past 9 p.m., but tonight she wandered. She found herself in the employee canteen, a place she hadn't truly been in years, not since the early startup days when she was still allowed to be curious instead of right. The room was dim, half-lit by vending machine glow, and one lonely ceiling bulb that flickered like it was debating its retirement. And then, the smell. Faint, but rich. Earthy. Coffee. At the far corner, Gavin sat alone. No laptop, no phone. Just a plain ceramic mug cradled between his hands like it carried something sacred. Ilara hesitated. She didn't want a meeting. She didn't even want to talk. She just didn't want to be alone with the silence inside her own head, so she approached slowly like stepping into a different temperature. He saw her but didn't rise, just nodded toward the second chair. Not reserved. She sat. There was a long beat of nothing. Just the sound of the HVAC whispering overhead and 2 cups steaming into the quiet. "You take sugar?" he asked. Ilara shook her head. "No, I like it bitter." He poured for her, handed over a black mug without ceremony. Their fingers didn't touch, but the warmth traveled. "You came here for a reason," he said eventually. She didn't deny it. Instead, she looked at him directly like she was scanning for some frequency not visible to the eye. "Tell me," she said softly, "in human terms." He paused, then leaned back just slightly as if bracing for a past that still had sharp corners. 6 years ago, he began. My wife was a safety supervisor at one of the West Coast fusion plants. Ilara froze. Fusion. That was no small line of work. She flagged a flaw in a pressure sensor, put it in writing, escalated it. His eyes didn't flicker, but his grip on the mug tightened. They shelved it, said it would cause panic before audit. Weeks later, the chamber failed. No one died, but a junior tech got hospitalized. She tried to go public. They offered a settlement instead. Elara swallowed. Her throat felt dry. She took it. She didn't want to, Gavin said, but she also didn't want Mila growing up in lawsuits. He paused. So I signed the NDA. Now her fingers tightened around her cup. They told me I'd be phased out quietly. And they kept their word. No job offers, no callbacks. My license expired. I stopped trying. Silence. Not awkward, just full. So, you became a janitor, she asked gently. He nodded. Union job, health benefits. Overnight shifts meant I could pick up Mila after school. No boardrooms, no politics, just clean lines, clean hands. Elara didn't know what to say, but she felt the weight of it. The unbearable stillness that comes after a storm when what's left behind isn't wreckage, but a kind of silence. Only grief understands. She wanted to say, "I'm sorry." She almost did. But the words sat there unspoken because a part of her was still terrified that apology would make her seem weak. That compassion was some kind of vulnerability she couldn't afford. So instead, she took a sip of the coffee. Bitter. Grounded. "You should have reported last night," she said finally. "You breached protocol." Gavin smiled faintly. Not sarcastic. Just knowing. "I didn't touch your code," he said. "Didn't override a single system. I just listened to the machine when it started to panic." She looked at him, caught off guard by the wording. "You listened." He nodded. "Machines aren't built to lie. When something's wrong, they scream in their own way. You just have to be quiet long enough to hear it." Something tightened in her chest. Not pain, not anger, recognition. "I used to be able to hear it too," she whispered, before the deadlines and the demo decks and the she waved vaguely optics. "Then maybe you just need quieter company," he said. And somehow that landed harder than anything else, because he wasn't wrong. She glanced down at her hands. One of her fingers tapped the mug absent-mindedly, an old habit from sleepless nights in code sprints. Gavin noticed. "You still listen," he said, "just not to yourself." That's when the silence changed. Not louder, not even deeper, just shared. Grief recognizes grief, even when it wears a suit and heels and hides behind quarterly reports. She looked at him again. For real this time. And he didn't ask, didn't pry, didn't demand her story in return. But he left enough space for her to offer it. She didn't, not yet. But her guard shifted. Not down. Just open. And that was enough. They sat in that late-night stillness, two people who had walked through different fires but carried the same burn. No titles, no noise, just two hands resting beside warm mugs, not quite touching, but close enough to feel the heat. Later that night, back in her office, Elara opened her personal notebook. Not the official one. Not the legal pad for board decisions or investor calls. Her real one. On the inside margin of a blank page she wrote in clean, quiet ink, "Breathe." Then, "Decide." She closed the cover gently. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop pretending it doesn't hurt. The demo room buzzed with attention you could taste. Rows of terminals blinked in anticipation, the high-res dashboard stretching across the main screen like a digital heartbeat waiting to spike. Elara stood at the front of the internal theater sleeves, rolled jaw-tight eyes locked on the data stream. This was the dry run. 50 million synthetic users. Simulated concurrency. Real-world pressure. Behind her, the department leads gathered like chess pieces, engineering, PR, finance, security. Each of them holding breath behind tight smiles. The demo had to go flawlessly. No skipped frame. No data stutter. No unexpected latency. 1 second delay and the narrative is, "Ether can't scale." Willa Chen whispered, arms crossed. And one bad narrative is all it takes. The first data stream kicked in. The dashboard lit up. And then chaos. The bandwidth gauge jolted like a pulse spiking mid-panic. Temperature charts danced erratically. Node sinks wobbled. GPU loads jittered, struggling to hold calibration. One of the engineers cursed under his breath. Another tapped frantically on his tablet, fingers blurring. "We're peaking too early," someone muttered. "Thermal load's not balancing. Push the reserve servers," another called out. "We're going to lose the side clusters." Ilara said nothing. Her eyes narrowed. She could feel it not just in the graphs, but in the room. That quiet terror everyone pretended not to have. Willa stepped forward, voice sharp. "We can't afford a misfire today," she said. "We've got 10 seconds to stabilize. No delays." The clock ticked. 10. 9. And then through the rising panic, a quiet voice cut through. Pause for 3 milliseconds. Heads turned. In the back corner of the room, Gavin stood plain blue uniform holding a ceramic mug, unbothered by the panic rippling around him. He took a slow sip of tea, then walked to the whiteboard behind the engineers. With calm, deliberate strokes, he wrote, "Pause 3 ms for intent check." The room went silent. Willa blinked. "Excuse me." Gavin didn't turn. "You're feeding synthetic inputs too fast. The system's reacting like it's under attack. It's not panic-proof, it's context-blind." Someone chuckled nervously. Another rolled their eyes. "We don't have time for guesses," an engineer said. But Ilara, without moving, said, "Try it." A beat passed. "Ma'am." "You heard me," she said. "Insert a 3-millisecond pause before every decision cycle. Let the system confirm intent. That's not in the design protocol. Then let's see if it should be." A few skeptical looks were exchanged, but the override was entered. On the big screen, the line paused. 3 milliseconds. And again. 3 milliseconds. The graphs steadied, slowly at first, then all at once. Bandwidth flattened. GPU thermals fell into sync. Node handoffs aligned like dancers finally finding rhythm. The machine breathed. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Like someone had laid a hand on the heart of the system and told it, "You don't have to panic. You're allowed to check first." The room exhaled as one. Willa didn't speak. Ilara turned toward Gavin, her face unreadable. "Where'd you learn?" "That same place the machine did," he said quietly. "Trial. Error. Listening." There was no smugness, no performance, just calm. For a second, everyone stood still, processing what they'd just witnessed. How something as absurdly small as 3 milliseconds could change the entire rhythm of a machine and a meeting. Ilara stepped forward. For the record, she said aloud, facing the group, the suggestion was made at the right moment. And it worked. Her voice carried weight. Official recognition. Acknowledgement. But her eyes were on Gavin. And for just a flicker of a second, nothing more, their breathing matched. Like two systems sinking across an invisible bridge. She turned back to the group. "Let's document the new protocol. Call it a latency-aware intent pause. 3 milliseconds. Non-negotiable." Willa still looked tense but said nothing. Gavin nodded once, then stepped back toward the wall content to disappear again. But Ilara's voice caught him mid-turn. "You should stay for the post-run debrief." He hesitated. "I'm not on the run team." "You are now." After the meeting, as the others dispersed, Ilara remained by the console. The hum of the machines had changed. Or maybe she had just finally heard it differently. Gavin placed his now empty mug on the cart. 3 milliseconds isn't much, he said. Ilara gave a soft exhale. It's more than most people give themselves before making a mess. He half smiled. You should write that on the wall. She didn't respond, but her fingers drifted to the edge of the console, tracing the faint scratches worn into the plastic. Her voice was lower now, more to herself than anyone. Maybe the real issue is we've trained everything to be fast, but not careful. Gavin looked at her. Really looked. Not at the CEO, but at the woman beneath the title. Then start somewhere small, like, 3 milliseconds? And for the first time in a long time, Ilara smiled without calculation. A quiet smile. earned, not engineered. Turns out between a mistake and a decision, all it takes is 3 milliseconds to breathe. The board meeting started sharp at 9:00 a.m., but the tension had clocked in long before. The room smelled of cold, coffee-polished ambition and old money pretending to be agile. Screens lit up with contract timelines and investor forecasts. Everyone was dressed for war, tailored suits, thin smiles, sharpened opinions. At the head of the table, Elara sat tall, posture precise, but her fingers rested lightly on a yellow post-it by her tablet. It said in her handwriting, "Breathe, then decide." The screen flicked to a new slide, client deadline, Q3, end, safety, certs lagging, contractual risk high. Andrew Park cleared his throat. "We have 7 days to hit that milestone or the entire regional licensing package stalls. That's 36% of our projected revenue." Willa Chen PR lead leaned forward, voice cool but clipped. "If we miss the window, the optics are brutal." "Ether falters on compliance is not the story we want before Series F." Another voice chimed in from legal. "We can propose a temporary relaxation of inspection thresholds with internal logging. We'll still be compliant, just agile." The term hung in the air like it had passed for wisdom. Then silence. Everyone waited for Elara to nod. She didn't. Instead, she slowly looked across the table, then said evenly, "What if we didn't?" A pause. Andrew blinked. Didn't what? Didn't lower the bar? What if we met it fully at cost to speed? A scoff came from someone at the far end. At cost to what investor confidence? Willa shook her head. "Elara, I know where your heart is, but this isn't just about safety. It's about survival." Elara's voice was quiet but steady. "Then, let's survive for the right reasons." Before anyone could interrupt, another voice cut through. From the side of the room where no one had expected him to speak. Gavin. He wasn't even supposed to be in the meeting. But after his contribution to the demo, Elara had quietly added his name to the invite list. He stood now, not grandstanding, just steady. "The question isn't whether we can deliver on time," he said. "It's what we're delivering." He looked directly at the table of executives. "Do we want to bring the contract to the boardroom or the people home from the night shift?" The room went still. Even Andrew didn't speak. Gavin continued voice level. "One of our junior engineers had a mini collapse last week. Caught it in the thermal log spike at 3:04 a.m. No break, no pause. She didn't report it. You know why. Because she thought the contract mattered more than her breath." He turned to Elara. "We need to breathe first, then build." The room was quiet again, but this time it wasn't silence out of resistance. It was consideration. Elara looked around the table and spoke with clarity. "I'll take the media heat. I'll take the investor pushback. I'll speak to the client myself. But we are not cutting inspection corners. We will meet every checkpoint. If it costs us the deal, then we walk with our integrity intact." Willa exhaled slowly. Andrew didn't nod, but his jaw unclenched. The decision was made, and it was hers. That night, the data center exhaled with a quieter hum, like it too had been waiting to feel heard. Elara wandered the lower levels past cold aisles and storage rooms. Her heels barely made a sound on the polished concrete. Then she stopped. Just outside the break room, she spotted Gavin kneeling beside a younger engineer, Rhea, no older than 25, clutching a thermos with shaking hands. Gavin wasn't lecturing. He wasn't fixing. He was just being there. He opened a tin from his cart. Inside were several small tea packets, each labeled with a different scent: chamomile, citrus, rooibos. He let her choose. Then he guided her gently, calmly. "Smell the tea. First," he said. "Don't drink. Just breathe it in." Rhea obeyed, breath stuttering as she closed her eyes. "Name 3 things you smell," Gavin said. "Orange, cinnamon, vanilla." "Good. Now one thing you hear. The fans." Exactly. You're here. Not in the graphs, not in the panic. Here. Alara stood frozen watching. The ritual wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate, grounding, sacred in its own quiet way. When Gavin stood, Rhea gave him a nod of real gratitude, then walked off steadier. He turned, seeing Alara now. "You don't talk down to them," she said quietly. "They're already doing that to themselves," he replied. "My job is to give them the space to stop." She stepped closer. "That thing with the T. It's not just mindfulness, is it?" "No," he said. "It's how I got out of my head after the accident. After losing everything. I needed a ritual, something real, something warm." She didn't ask what he lost. She already knew. And tonight she finally understood. His calm wasn't a quirk. It wasn't passivity. It was survival, refined. They stood in the open-access hallway, dim lights above casting quiet halos. Through the glass, the servers blinked like stars in their own artificial galaxy. Gavin looked up then to her. "You ever just step outside the data noise and realize how much of this feels like space?" Alara chuckled softly. "I used to call it the digital sky." He raised a brow. "Nice. Trademark it." She leaned against the railing. "You ever wonder what the machine sees when it looks back?" Gavin's voice was softer now. "Maybe it sees us the way we should see each other, fragile systems overheating, waiting for someone to pause and check for intent." The words sat heavy in her chest. She turned to him. "Tomorrow, I need you close," she said. "Not behind the mop bucket, not in the corner. With me, at the table." Gavin's eyebrows lifted just slightly. "You sure?" "We're not just fixing machines anymore," she said. "We're rewiring the way we lead." He didn't answer right away, but he didn't say no. Their eyes held a moment longer. Not romantic, not professional, just human. Two people who'd finally lowered their shields just enough to hear the quiet truths underneath. When pride steps aside, the heart hears what it's been missing all along. It started with a whisper, then a ripple, then a fire. A 6-year-old video surfaced on a niche tech ethics blog buried beneath clickbait and banner ads. Grainy footage, poor lighting. But the voice was clear, passionate, steady. A woman, seated at a plain desk, looked into the lens and said, "If we bury warning signs to protect our timeline, we're not delaying risk, we're manufacturing it." The title below the video read, "Suppressed Memo from Former Fusion Safety Lead Ether's Dirty Past." Within hours, it spread. Within a day, it exploded. Someone had dug into the metadata, confirmed she'd once worked for a fusion contractor linked via legacy acquisition chains to a system that now fell under EtherCloud's infrastructure. And then someone else found the name. Gavin Hale. Widowed. Former technician. Current janitor. By morning, every tech news site had the story. From whistleblower to widow, the cost of being right too soon. Why is her husband fixing floors while Ether climbs valuation charts, CEO silent on janitor's past? What else don't we know? The narrative twisted fast. From a human story to a corporate scandal. In the war room, the air was thick. The walls pulsed with screen light feeds, headlines, investor chatter, client email pings. The executive team sat around the polished walnut table, eyes drawn to the unfolding firestorm. "The video's real," Willa Chen said, flatly phone still buzzing in her hand. "And the name match is airtight. They were married." Andrew Park stood pacing slowly. "So let's state the obvious. This didn't happen under our leadership. Different company, different standards." CFO Elena Kim chimed in quiet but firm. "And yet public perception doesn't care about timelines. They care about narrative. And we're losing it." Andrew's voice dropped an octave. Measured. Forceful. "We run infrastructure for hospitals, banks, air traffic control. If we let a single emotional thread dictate operational integrity, we risk mass panic." He looked directly at Alara. "If investors think we're vulnerable, They'll pull. You know what that means. Reduced runway, frozen projects, layoffs, thousands. Willa didn't flinch. If we deny this completely, we look like we're burying the truth. We say nothing, we look like we're hiding. She swiped to her next slide. We need a response that's honest, but controlled. A narrative of transparency that doesn't ignite fear. Elena added, we could cancel the demo, but that sends a signal of instability. If we move forward, we need guardrails. Hard ones. All eyes turned to Alara, and then Gavin, who'd been silent in the back of the room, stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You're all talking like we have to choose between the contract and the people. We don't. He placed both hands gently on the edge of the table. You bring the people home first, then you talk about contracts. Willa folded her arms. That's a beautiful sentiment, Gavin, but feelings don't pay for server racks. He didn't blink. Neither do lawsuits, or funerals. Silence again. But this time, no one interrupted. Ilara's tablet buzzed. She looked down at the incoming options list her chief of staff had prepped 3 possible public paths forward. Option: a deny and disassociate. Statement distancing Ether from prior entity. Clarify 0 liability. Calms investor fear. Kills internal trust. Option B: full confession and demo. Cancel. Own all links, pause operations. Internal investigation, ethical clarity. Likely triggers partner withdrawal. Option C: accept responsibility and reinforce integrity. Acknowledge legacy failure. Launch third-party audit. Demo continues with added safety oversight. Transparent, controlled, high-integrity narrative. Still risky, but human. She stared at them, then looked up. We go with C. Andrew shifted. Alara, no. This is the line. She stood now. We commission a full audit. Independent. We continue serving our clients without disruption, and we integrate new safety standards across the board. She turned to Willa. Prepare messaging. We put people before speed, and we'll prove it with process. Willa nodded. I'll have it out within the hour. And we implement the 1-minute breathe protocol and 3-millisecond intent pause as formal procedure. Document it. Train it. Live it. Andrew exhaled slowly. Alara, our numbers. I'm not buying this contract with silence, she cut in. Not anymore. A quiet beat passed, and then Gavin gently reached into his pocket. He pulled out something small. A laminated tag. Faded. He stepped forward and placed it on the table. Human input required it. Lay there between a spreadsheet and a legal briefing. A tiny reminder of what had started this all. Alara met his eyes. He didn't need to say anything more. Later that afternoon, before leaving the building, Gavin entered Alara's office one last time. She was at her desk finalizing the statement. He didn't speak. He just reached into his pocket, pulled out a paper drone, its wing torn, and placed it gently on her desk. No words, no note, just a quiet goodbye. She looked at it, then at him. You're leaving. He nodded. Not quitting. Just stepping back while the noise dies down. I don't want to become the face of a storm. Her voice softened. You're not a storm. No, but people need someone to blame. And right now, I'm too visible. She didn't argue, didn't try to stop him, because deep down, she understood. Promise me one thing, she said. He raised a brow. Don't fix that wing. She nodded at the drone. Not yet. Gavin smiled faintly. You want it to stay broken? No, she said quietly. I want to remember that it was. He looked at her for a long moment, then turned to leave. As the door clicked shut, Alara looked down at the wing, bent imperfect, but somehow honest, just like the path they'd chosen. The cost of doing the right thing is real, but the cost of silence is so much higher. The news cycle spun on. Then, slowly, it spun out. In the weeks after the leak, Ether Cloud held its breath. The internet raged for 3 days straight, then found newer stories to devour. Investors clutched their seats, waited for fallout, and saw none. Clients watched for technical failures and saw none. What they did see was something rare: a company that didn't panic, a leadership team that didn't lie, and a CEO who for once didn't speak in sound bites. Instead, Ilara listened. They launched an anonymous feedback channel encrypted unfiltered. Hundreds of voices flowed in, some raw, some kind, some angry, but all real. The third-party audit began sweeping every legacy system safety checkpoint and internal comms thread. No one was immune, not even the C-suite. But it wasn't chaos. It was cleansing. Ilara spent most days not in her office but in the labs, or the overnight call rooms, or the loading docks. She showed up unannounced, sat beside junior devs, ate reheated leftovers with overnight techs, asked what's not working, and meant it. There was no press release, no cameras, just quiet correction. One morning, she stopped by a machine room on sub-level 2 where the insulation was always slightly too warm, the air slightly too stale. No one noticed her at first. She didn't announce herself. She just watched as a team ran diagnostics, not a single raised voice, no scramble. Just steady, intentional rhythm. 1 minute breathe. 3 millisecond pause. It was working. 3 weeks into the silence, Ilara took a cab out of the city. She didn't tell anyone. The driver dropped her at the base of a sloping hill just outside a decommissioned plant site where weeds had started reclaiming concrete and history clung to the rusted fences like moss. At the far end stood a small black wall stone, not digital. A memorial. Rows of names etched in steel. Technicians, operators, interns, people who had been told the system was safe. Until it wasn't. She found the name easily. Leah Hale. There was no photo, no fanfare, just clean letters weathered by time. Ilara stood in front of it for a long moment, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a still-warm paper cup. Black coffee. No sugar. She knelt quietly and placed it beneath the name. Not forgotten, she whispered. No one saw her, but the wind did carry her words. That evening, as twilight pulled over the city like a blanket, she found herself on a quieter street. Older buildings' bricks faded to soft brown. A small window on the second floor glowed with warm yellow light. She didn't knock. She didn't need to. From where she stood on the sidewalk, she could see Gavin through the glass seated at the kitchen table beside Mila. The two of them folded bright scraps of paper into small, imperfect flying things. A pile of drones already covered the table. Mila's head tilted back with laughter as one nosedived off the table. Gavin simply smiled and handed her another sheet. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't scripted. It was the kind of peace most people chase their whole lives, but only found in small, steady rituals. She didn't stay long. But as she turned to leave, she smiled to herself softly, protectively, like she was safeguarding something sacred. Back at the lab, Ilara returned to her console. She opened the KVM panel, the same one that had overheated weeks ago, and pulled a yellow post-it from her coat pocket. In thick black ink, it read, "Human input required." She pressed it carefully to the corner of the screen. It wasn't a warning anymore. It was a principle. Across the corridor, Andrew Park stood in the newly renovated training suite. Glass walls surrounded the team, once an engineering bullpen, now converted into a breathing ground. A young ops manager guided a group through the 1-minute breathe protocol, 15 seconds of silence before any major system decision, 3 milliseconds before confirming command. Andrew watched through the glass. He didn't interrupt, didn't correct. Instead, he noticed something he'd never really looked for before. No one looked panicked. No one looked afraid of making the wrong call. They were still, yes, but not frozen. And for the first time, the stillness didn't feel like stagnation. It felt like stability. He murmured to himself, "Maybe I've been mistaking silence for stability." He caught his own words and let them land. Later that night, Ilara stood on the rooftop alone as the city flickered below. The hum of traffic buzzed like distant data. She thought about the contract they might still lose, the headlines that might come again, the investors who still whispered. And yet they hadn't lost the people. They hadn't lost the truth. And maybe, just maybe, they hadn't lost the chance to lead differently. She closed her eyes and said softly into the wind, "Gavin, if you ever come back, I promise I'll listen." Silence is also a language when we use it to honor someone's pain. The ballroom at Ether HQ had never looked more polished or more precarious. Rows of journalists, clients, and quiet but powerful investors filled the space phones' raised eyes, scanning for any micro-expression to tweet about. Camera crews tracked motion like predators. Every light, every lens, every breath was trained on the center stage. This was it, the live demo that would either restore faith or detonate it. At the podium, Willa Chen stood tall, clad in navy silk and conviction. She tapped her mic once. Silence followed. 3 weeks ago she began We made a choice. Not to panic, not to pivot wildly, but to listen. Her voice was steady, familiar, but softened now like the velvet over steel. We put people before speed. And today we'll show you exactly what that looks like. Click. She stepped back. The lights dimmed slightly as Alara Miles walked out. No teleprompter, no script, no PR armor. Just her. Hair tied back, a simple gray blazer, hands unclenched. She paused before the crowd scanning their faces. For once, she wasn't reading them for risk. She was seeing them. And they were seeing her. "I used to think leadership meant velocity," she said, voice low but clear. That faster was always better. That silence meant stability. That if the system wasn't screaming, we were winning. A faint shifting in the room. But silence can also be fear, and speed can be the enemy of safety. She didn't flinch. I missed things. I trusted too few. I didn't listen early enough. A breath, not rehearsed. That ends today. She turned to the massive wall of screens behind her. We've rebuilt the cluster to not just scale but respond. To pause, assess, and choose, not just execute. Technicians nodded from the side stage. The demo sequence began. We'll show you now what a system can do when you treat it like a living thing. Fingers flew across keyboards. The synthetic user load climbed 10 million, 30 million, 50 million concurrent users. The graphs pulsed, CPU temps climbed, bandwidth stretched. It was the edge of chaos again. Then it hesitated, just for a moment. A hiccup, a flicker of doubt in the machine. Like it remembered panic, remembered the fear of the last time. The room stiffened. Willa's fingers twitched. A producer whispered, "Abort." Alara stepped forward. She didn't call for a reset. She walked to the main server rack at center stage, right into the spotlight, and gently placed her palm against the warm steel. "We breathe first," she whispered. The phrase caught the mic just enough to echo. Pause 3 milliseconds. Then decide. Mirror. The exact line Gavin had written weeks ago on a whiteboard no one had asked for. Now said aloud under lights with the weight of a company behind it. The graphs paused, spiked, then settled. Thermals dropped, load leveled. The system found its rhythm. The room exhaled like one organism finally letting go. And then applause. Not wild, not polite. Real, earned, sustained. Behind Alara, the screen filled with green light success sync stability. But she didn't smile yet, because something else happened. The camera, panning across the audience, caught a figure in the back row, half in shadow. Gavin Hale. He hadn't RSVP'd. He wasn't on the list, but he stood there, arms folded, holding something small in his hand. A paper drone. One wing taped, still bent. Not fixed, remembered. Alara saw him. The applause faded, but she didn't move. Instead, in front of everyone, she bowed her head. Not in weakness, in gratitude. Then just once she looked back at Gavin. Their eyes met. Not a smile, not a tear. Just one message: I see you. Not as a janitor, not as a liability. As the reason this wasn't just a recovery, it was a rebirth. The press that night didn't praise the tech specs. They didn't lead with uptime or throughput. They talked about something else. She didn't just fix the system. She rewired herself on live feed. Vulnerability isn't weakness. At Ether, it's now a protocol. 3 milliseconds of grace saved a company's soul. Backstage, as the last guest filed out, Alara walked slowly toward the rack where her palm print still lingered. Willa approached, arms crossed, face unreadable. That wasn't what we rehearsed. Alara looked at her. No, it was better. Willa nodded, once eyes softer now. The team's already quoting you, by the way. HR wants it on mugs. Alara laughed a real laugh. Tell them to quote Gavin instead. She turned, and Willa followed her gaze to the back of the room. But Gavin was gone. Only the drone remained carefully placed on a seat, its wing fluttering slightly in the air-conditioned breeze. She didn't just fix the machine. She fixed herself right where the world could see. The loading dock was quiet. Late afternoon sun slanted across the concrete, spilling long amber shadows behind crates and stacked pallets. This was the least glamorous corner of Ether HQ, where deliveries were signed, repairs logged, and no one bothered with small talk. It was exactly where Gavin liked to be. He stepped out from the service elevator, a small box tucked under his arm. His old work boots echoed softly on the metal grating. The sound, steady and grounded, was his way of announcing himself without needing to speak. She was already there. Alara. Leaning casually against a pallet marked non-critical hardware, hair pulled back, blazer off. She held a metal case in her hands. Old, scuffed, its hinges had that familiar squeak of something once locked away and finally remembered. They didn't rush to greet each other. They just stood for a moment in the pause. Then Gavin held up the object in his hand, the paper drone. Same folded frame, same patched wing. But now, with a new wing cut from recycled cardboard. Thicker, stronger, but still recognizably hers. Thought it deserved a second flight, he said. Alara smiled, eyes soft. Not fixed, just reinforced. He nodded, like most of us. She opened the metal case slowly. Inside, resting on worn velvet foam, was a tray of mismatched screws, bolts, washers, and heat-safe pins. From the floor of the fusion plant, she said quietly, salvaged after the accident. I had them stored. Never really knew why. Gavin ran a thumb along one of the screws. Industrial grade. Too heavy for modern designs. You kept them, to remember, she said, but more importantly, so I wouldn't repeat. They sat side by side on a crate, the box between them, the drone in Gavin's lap. He handed her the screwdriver wordlessly, and together they worked. It wasn't elegant, this strange combination of paper and steel. The screw didn't quite fit the wing's new hinge. The balance was off. But, slowly, steadily, it began to resemble flight again. Gavin adjusted the angle of the new wing. Might spin left a little. We all do, Alara replied. He looked at her. She wasn't joking. Not entirely. The final screw slipped into place. They set it down gently. The drone wobbled for a second on its makeshift landing gear. Then, with a light breath from Gavin's hand, it lifted, wobbled, spun, then steadied, suspended just long enough to feel like hope. Alara caught it midair, laughing under her breath. First time I've caught something without calculating the trajectory. That's how you know it matters, Gavin said. When it's not precise, but still worth catching. She held the drone between them. Then, softer, I was terrified. Gavin tilted his head. Of what they'd see, she admitted. Of being exposed, vulnerable. I thought if I showed doubt I'd lose control. He didn't flinch, didn't fill the silence, but standing in front of them during the demo. She continued. I wasn't scared of failure. I was scared of being seen failing. She looked down at the drone, then back at him. I'm still scared. He met her gaze, voice low, warm. Weakness isn't when you admit you need someone. It's when you pretend you don't. The words landed gently, like a coat placed on shivering shoulders. There was a moment, barely a beat, when her hand brushed his on the drone's wing. Not a grab, not a move, just contact. Enough to say I trust you, without needing to spell it out. Their fingers lingered for a second too long. Neither of them pulled away. Above them, the city began to flicker to life, windows lighting up like 1,000 tiny circuits. Ether's rooftop edge glowed faintly in the distance, mirrored by the glow inside Ilara's eyes. She leaned back against the crate, exhaling slowly. You going to stay this time? She asked. Gavin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached down, folded the drone's wings again, tight and secure, then placed it in her hands. I think. It depends on whether we're still flying it together. She turned the drone over in her palms. One wing was still imperfect, slightly crooked, but stronger than before, like something that had earned its shape. We are, she said. The quiet between them wasn't awkward now. It was alignment, like systems syncing, like breath matching breath. And somewhere inside that silence a promise formed. Not loud, not labeled, but held. Just outside the loading dock, the security light clicked on, casting soft gold over the sidewalk. The light stretched their shadows long side by side, two silhouettes standing closer than before. Not touching, not speaking, but ready. When hands open, broken wings finally find a place to mend. 1 year later, the data center didn't just hum, it breathed. Not with machines, but with people. With rhythm, with intent. Beneath the tall glass windows of the Ether Cloud Annex, a new banner unfurled in the soft morning light. The Human Circuit Initiative, powered by precision. Anchored in compassion. Today was the launch. Rows of folding chairs lined the front plaza, filled with faces old and new engineers, parents, students, maintenance crew, board members, and families in worn denim and shiny shoes alike. The data center, once a fortress of silence and heat, had grown something unexpected alongside its mainframe, a garden. Raised beds of herbs and low-slung benches bordered the plaza, making space for pause. For people. At the center stage stood Ilara. But before she spoke, it was Mila who stepped forward. 9 years old, in sneakers too clean and a dress too colorful for Techland, she held a paper drone in one hand and a clipboard in the other. Hi, I'm Mila, she said, mic slightly too tall, voice unwavering. The crowd chuckled gently. I used to fold these with my dad in a tiny kitchen, she said, holding up the drone. Now I teach other kids how to make them. Behind her, a small table buzzed with activity. 10 children learning to fold, refold, and test gliders in the early breeze. Every drone needs wings, Mila continued, but also something people forget: landing gear. So when dreams fly, they can land safe. That's what this place is. Applause broke out. She smiled, bowed dramatically, and bounced back toward the folding table. The first initiative of the day, mentorship. Ether engineers, some of them with job titles fancier than their lanyards, could handle, paired up with local students, especially from neighborhoods the tech world often forgot. Each child had a badge. Each mentor had a promise. There was no code yet, no metrics, just questions, just curiosity. At one table, a young boy asked how fiber optics knew where to send light. The engineer paused, then lit up like the server racks he once feared. Another table sketched a dream app on a napkin. You draw your mood, and it plays music to help. A software lead grinned, already writing the API in her head. Across the plaza, under a tree barely older than the program itself, Andrew Park stood with a group of parents and high schoolers. He looked down at a laminated circuit map Mila had handed him earlier that morning, complete with color-coded paths for safety zones, emergency exits, and meditation corners. One father asked, "Do you really think it's safer now?" Andrew didn't rush the answer. The best safety, he finally said, is the kind you don't notice, the kind built so well. No one thinks to thank it. But they all lean on it. He held up the map. That's what we're building now. He looked at Mila from afar, helping a little girl refold a torn drone. And they're the ones who'll inherit it. Willa Chen stood beside a group of investors and nonprofit leaders near the main entrance, guiding them through an exhibit wall transparent panels displaying photos, timelines, and recovered items. She pointed to a worn-out Post-it note preserved in acrylic. It read, "Human input required." This was from the shift that changed everything she said. A journalist raised an eyebrow. Was it? Gavin's? Willa smiled. Does it matter whose hand wrote it if everyone's now living by it? She turned and gestured to the large display behind her. Ether Annual Impact Year 1, 412 mentorship matches, 3,200 safety drills completed, 86 scholarships awarded, 0 compliance breaches, 1 cultural reboot. The best stories, Willa said, aren't the ones you spin. They're the ones you prove. With process, with people, with repetition. One guest whispered to another, she should write speeches. Willa overheard. I do. Toward the end of the program, a hush fell over the crowd as Alara returned to center stage. She stood with no notes, just presence. Behind her, a wall of names etched into brushed steel stood as a quiet monument. These were the workers lost in accidents from previous companies' previous eras. Names that had once been hidden behind contracts and legalese. Today, they were named, out loud. Ilara read each one, no titles, no justifications. Just acknowledgement. When she reached the last name, her voice softened. Leah Hale. A beat passed. She looked up. We can't rewrite the past, but we can decide what gets built on top of it. She glanced toward Gavin, standing just off stage, sleeves rolled, a screwdriver still in his back pocket. He didn't move. He didn't need to. Ether isn't perfect, Ilara said, but we are now built to pause, to listen, to check for intent before we act. She looked out across the plaza at the kids folding drones, the engineers laughing with students, the security staff helping set up the water station. We promise to get you home, she said. Not just your data. You. That's our commitment. Applause didn't come instantly. It came like a wave, slow, swelling, sustained. At the edge of the stage, Gavin quietly bent down to adjust one of the folding tables wobbling on uneven pavement. He didn't announce it, didn't linger, just made sure it stood even. The best legacy isn't a new logo. It's a generation who knows how to breathe before they decide. The rooftop was quiet, high above the hum of servers, the pulse of fiber optics, and the press of everything that made the world run fast. Tonight, it all slowed down. A soft wind threaded through the railing, tugging gently at the edge of Ilara's blazer. In her hands were 2 paper cups, no branding, no sleeves, just warmth and steam rising into the night air. She found Gavin already standing near the edge, his silhouette outlined by the LED wash from the data center below. The rooftop was lit just enough to feel safe, but dim enough to let the stars peek through. She walked over and handed him a cup. No sugar, she said, like the first time. Gavin raised an eyebrow, accepting the cup. Still bitter. A little, she said, then smiled, but less than before. He took a sip, nodded. They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Below them, the plaza was mostly dark now, just a few garden lights flickering, someone forgotten a string of fairy bulbs still glowing near the workshop tents. And above them, stars. Real ones. For once, the night sky hadn't been drowned by city noise. The glow from Ether's data cluster softened upward instead of screaming into the void, making room for the cosmos to whisper back. You fixed it, Ilara said, tilting her head toward the corner of the rooftop. There, resting on a crate, was the old paper drone, now repaired wing's smooth flight mechanism tweaked with a tiny hinge Gavin had cut from a plastic binder. He picked it up carefully, held it flat on his palm, then released. The drone took off not high but steady. It looped once, gliding through the rooftop air currents. Its LED chip embedded beneath the paper blinked softly. White and gold. Digital starlight echoing the real ones above. "Do you ever miss the sky?" Ilara asked suddenly. Her voice was soft, sincere. Gavin turned to her. "Not when it's sitting beside me. The words weren't said to charm. They just landed." Ilara didn't look away. "I used to be terrified of silence. I thought it meant nothing was happening, that if I wasn't moving, I was failing." "You weren't alone," he said. "We've built a whole world that confuses motion with meaning." And now he glanced at the drone circling back toward them, its wing wobbling ever so slightly. "Now, I think stillness is where you hear what matters." She stepped closer to the railing, hand brushing the edge, then resting flat on the cool metal. He did the same, and together they stood shoulder to shoulder overlooking the grid of lights below and the stars above. No declarations, no swelling music, just presence. "I still get afraid," she admitted. "Of what? Of breaking again? Of letting someone see it?" Gavin didn't speak right away. Then, gently, we all break. But when we let someone close enough to help rebuild, that's not weakness. That's trust. Her eyes flickered. She nodded. Then, without ceremony, without tension, their fingers found each other's on the railing. Not grasping, just touching. It wasn't romance wrapped in fireworks. It was something deeper, a shared alignment, a quiet understanding. "Breathe," she whispered. Then decide he finished. They watched the drone circle once more, then dip low. As it floated back toward the edge of the rooftop, a small slip of paper unfurled from its underbelly, a thin strip that caught the breeze just enough to flutter like a ribbon. "Human input required." It danced through the air before drifting gently to the ground between them. Ilara bent to pick it up, smoothing it between her fingers. "Maybe we don't need to have everything figured out," she said. "Maybe we just need to be willing to ask." "And to listen," Gavin added. The drone settled near their feet, still intact. For the first time in years, neither of them felt like they were waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a test. It was a second flight. Far below, the building pulsed with quiet systems and steady hands. In offices and gardens, in call rooms and after-hours labs, people moved with intention. Pausing when needed. Breathing before deciding. Folding wings when the wind changed. Because someone had taught them how. On the rooftop, Ilara leaned her head gently against Gavin's shoulder. They stayed like that for a long moment. Not holding on too tightly. Just together. The stars blinked overhead, and the city like them kept moving. But now, with more grace, with space between beats. The wings were never broken, they just needed to learn how to fly under a different sky. And that was the janitor who rewired the CEO's heart. A story about healing courage and learning to pause just long enough to remember what truly matters. Sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who help us find our way back to kindness, back to humanity, back to ourselves. Because in the end, it's not about titles or speed or power. It's about listening, breathing, and choosing to care before we decide. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed an act of quiet kindness that changed how you see people? Or maybe you've lived a moment that reminded you humans come before the system. Share your story in the comments below. And tell us where you're watching from, whether it's a quiet kitchen in Ohio, a late-night shift in London, or somewhere under the same stars Gavin and Ilara stood beneath. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story about love, empathy, and second chances. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending this time with me and for believing like I do that even broken wings can still learn to fly. Until next time, breathe, then decide.